Hello and welcome back here to On the Line for our next episode. This interview is going to be with Mr. Greg Joseph, and this interview is going to be a little bit different, but we also want to hear your feedback on this interview because normally we talk a little bit more on theological issues, maybe looking at culture. Here we're going to be talking with a good friend of mine who's also a renowned lawyer. He's done some really big cases. You're going to hear about some of them in this interview. So two things with Greg. First off, he's got some great insights into the legal system and some of the really important battles that are taking place. That's what he's going to focus on today. But second, with that insight into some of the legal battles that are going on through the United States, also when it comes to both liberty and religious liberty, he also has some really good insights on just the current events and things that are going on. So in this interview, you're going to hear some very interesting legal cases that he can provide some great insights on. Very fascinating. But what we're interested in hearing from you is whether or not we can continue this type of interview, probably once every 3 or 4 months, so do it kind of quarterly, and just have Greg on to talk about current events. So less of a theological focus, although most of our videos will, of course, continue to do that. But want to hear your feedback on if you'd be interested in that, and that will help us understand if we should maybe do it twice a year, 4 times a year, 6 times a year, something like that. So we appreciate your feedback. And as always, we also appreciate the 3 seconds it takes to like this video, which really helps the YouTube algorithm so that these videos can get out in front of many more people. We appreciate all the support and enjoy. All right, Greg Joseph, how are you doing?
I'm doing great. Glad to be here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I've got to lead off with the first question.
Okay.
Because I think it's one of the most fascinating things about you, right?
Okay.
So when you're at work,
Yep.
right, over here in your office, what do you sit at?
Right. I sit at a towering, lumbering, gigantic desk that once belonged to Brock Lesnar, the WWE superstar / former wrestler from Minnesota.
Maybe one of the best freak athletes.
Yeah, he is absolutely a freak.
Mhm.
The guy's just gigantic. Yeah, I wound up with it. It was a Facebook buy. I didn't know it was his, but just as we were loading it into the back of the truck, the guy said, "Hey, you know what's funny about this desk?" I said, "What's that?" He goes, "This is Brock Lesnar's desk." I said, "Brock Lesnar?" He said, Yeah, I helped him move a few years ago. I knew him from high school. And yeah, he just said, "I don't want to deal with the thing anymore. You keep it." And so anyway, yeah, now I got his desk.
Yeah. That thing's not going to break.
No, not going to break. No. And I think about him every time I sit down to type.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Which, right. Well, once I mean, Brock Lesnar,
Yeah.
I forget what I was reading this or listening to it, but I don't know how much he weighs, probably 370 or something. The guy's a massive animal.
huge.
He can jump, he can stand still, and he can jump from a standstill 10 feet.
You're kidding me.
No, and his 40 time was something like a 4.4 or 4.5.
Really?
Yeah. I mean, it was well under 5 seconds.
Wow.
So can you just imagine like it being in combat against someone who can weigh 370 pounds and can cover 10 feet
No.
in a leap?
No,
I mean,
I cannot imagine running the other direction.
Yeah.
I'm out.
Yeah.
Like, you win.
but you now have his desk.
I have his desk.
Yeah.
That's got to get me somewhere, right? I
Yeah.
mean,
Well, that's why we brought you on. I don't know what else we're going to talk about. But
I appreciate the honesty. Yeah, that's good. I suspected as much, but yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway.
But it is fitting, right? Because I mean, what you're doing.
Yeah.
So you're a lawyer.
Yep.
And you've kind of found a very niche area, and in many ways, you are fighting against, in a very important way, a lot of the forces that are at work that are trying to undermine the good and the true things that we've inherited and that we value as Christians or just as good citizens. And you're on the front lines in areas that I want everyone to understand what those battles look like, which is why not Brock Lesnar. That's why I wanted to have this conversation. But if you can just tell our listeners a little bit about what you do in that niche that you found that you're operating in now as a lawyer.
Sure. So I began as a public defender, actually. I prosecuted very briefly, but then began as a public defender. Maybe it was just that I was winning too often and I liked to lose more frequently. So I began suing governments instead of defending. That's not true. I still do defense work.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of my practice is still criminal defense. But about 7 years ago, I got involved with a group of guys who were over in Bloomington. And
that's like South Minneapolis.
You're right.
Yeah.
South Minneapolis, sure. Yep. I think it's technically like the third biggest city in Minnesota, or the fourth, you know, behind Minneapolis, St. Paul.
Okay.
Anyway, yeah, it's an inner ring suburb. And, well, I mean, yeah, I'll let you know. My wife and I lived in Bloomington, and we got notice one day that the city was going to be switching over to organized trash collection. Okay, whatever, you know. But they were going to displace the free market in trash hauling. And, you know, I kind of like to have the ability, if my price gets too high, I like to call a different hauler and say, hey, can you beat this guy? And sure enough, people were willing, and competition. It's amazing how that works, you know? So I thought I don't really want this to happen. So I wonder what I can do to stop it. So I went to a city council meeting, and I met a group of guys who were just neighborhood guys, you know? And, anyway, that case, suing Bloomington, turned into 2 trips to the Minnesota Supreme Court. And, I didn't know what to expect at first. I didn't know what I was doing. I kind of learned on the fly. And anyway, that was 7 years ago. And since then, I have this weird little corner of the law where I sue a lot of cities. So yeah, it's been tons of fun. And I feel like I'm where I'm supposed to be. Like, I feel like I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing, you know, for God and for the state and for me. And it feels right.
Well, I know you shared different cases with me, right? We've had a handful of conversations, and each case always shocks me at just kind of the coordinated effort that people go to in order to undermine people's rights, and also just to bring kind of just absurdity, right, into people's lives and into the public sphere. So, I mean, and you are battling against those in so many different ways. So, I mean, I don't know if you can just kind of walk us through what are some cases that listeners should know of, just kind of glimpses into these things are actually going on. And these things are very important for regular life.
Right. So when you asked me to be on, the first thing I thought of was what happened in St. Paul this past election cycle. Okay. So last year, the legislature, well, let me back up a little bit. So cities in Minnesota, okay, they like their taxes. Okay. They love to raise taxes on folks for any reason or no reason. Okay. I'm being broad, but you know, come on. So, you know, St. Paul wanted to raise a sales tax. Okay. Along with, I think, 33 other cities and counties across Minnesota. Well, they can't do that on their own. Okay. So they have to have special permission from the legislature. So the legislature last spring passed this big raft, okay, that authorized all these different counties and cities to raise special sales taxes, okay, sales and use tax. So, but there was one catch, and the catch was you had to get approval from the voters, okay? So, and I think it had to happen within the next 2 years after the law passed or something like that. So, St. Paul said, okay, well, that means we got to ask the voters. So we got to draft a question to present to the voters. So the ballot question they put together, okay, was the first part was pretty simple. It was, shall the city of St. Paul levy a 1%, I think it was 1%, might have been 3/4, I think it was 1%, 1% sales and use tax to fund cities and parks in the city of St. Paul. They had to tell you how long the tax would be in place, okay, which the reality is forever, okay, but they said 20 years, all right, because at the end of 20 years, taxes don't go away. Okay? Taxes they're like zombies, okay? Anyway, so after 20 years, okay, they expect to raise $1 billion for roads and bridges and parks in the city, okay? So the ballot question that the city council drafted, okay, was, shall the city of St. Paul raise a 1% sales and use tax to fund roads and bridges and parks? Okay. Easy enough. A yes vote, okay, means that a new 1% sales and use tax will be instituted in the city of St. Paul to fund roads and bridges and parks. Okay. A no vote means that roads and bridges and parks will be funded by other local sources, primarily through an increase in your property taxes.
Which was not what they were supposed to do.
Well, it's like, so the choice that the taxpayer has is, do you want it to come out of your left pocket or your right pocket?
Mm-hmm.
Do you want a raise in your property tax, or do you want a raise in this new sales and use tax? Okay. Well, the problem is, of course, that the choice is supposed to be between, do you want a 1% sales and use tax, or do you not want a 1% sales and use tax? Not, we're going to get you coming or going,
Mm-hmm.
and we're either going to take it out of that pocket or that pocket. What's it going to be?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So my client, okay, tremendous advocate for the people of St. Paul. Anyway, I've done some work with him in the past as well. He sued pro se. He sued the city of St. Paul pro se and said, this doesn't fly. This is a scam.
Mm-hmm.
You're not giving people meaningful choice. And unfortunately, it didn't go his way, at district court. And so then he called me, and we petitioned the Supreme Court for review, Minnesota Supreme Court for review. It was sort of a hair on fire thing because we had a very short window before the language had to go to the Secretary of State.
Mm-hmm.
And they picked up the case. And then it was only a day or two later that the city of St. Paul reconvened and said, well, maybe we better take a second look at this language. And so they did.
Yeah.
So they changed it and made it a straight up or down vote.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'd love to say the voters rejected the new tax. They didn't. But that part's beyond my control.
Right.
But the point is, that somebody would do that, that a city council, the city government would do that, would try to say, that's not a choice.
Mm-hmm.
It's a sham.
Yeah.
So anyway, that's the sort of thing I do, and it's like I said, it's a really weird corner of the law, but yeah, you can find examples all over the place.
Yeah.
So
yeah, just on the surface, that's obviously an absurd, right? So they knew what they were doing.
Yeah.
And they were completely abusing the system. And point being, if there's not checks and balances on those things, if there's not a pushback, then that's ridiculous.
It's ridiculous.
Right. Yeah.
And actually, so Beltrami County, which is Bemidji, okay,
up north,
yep, they got a new jail. Okay, so they had to fund the new jail, right? So legislature gave them a special dispensation to raise the sales and use tax in Bemidji. Well, Beltrami County must have contacted St. Paul, okay, because the ballot language that they put on their ballot was either you fund the new jail or we're going to take it out of your property taxes.
Mm.
And unfortunately, the timing was such, it happened so quickly that, nobody called. It was just, nobody thought about it.
Mm-hmm.
And suddenly there it is on the ballot.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the final numbers, it was more than 90%. I want to say it was 93% voted in favor of the new sales tax.
Mm-hmm.
And only 7% voted to raise their own property
Because
taxes.
it's just the confusing
Right.
way that they write it up.
Right. And it's kryptonite, because
Yeah.
people think at least with a sales tax, you can avoid purchases in the city and, drive or in the county and, drive a few miles over.
Yeah.
But with a property tax.
So a lot of these things, they creep through.
Yeah.
Yeah. What was the, you mentioned one, you said it might get overturned here recently, in the near future, possibly over the next couple months, right? It's being looked at, I think you said, but it had to do with, it was kind of a backdoor way that organizations, federal organizations, right? Like FBI, CIA, that they can pass laws that don't go through the judicial system. Right. And that a lot of things get passed through. I don't know if you can speak to that one.
Mm-hmm. Yep, sure. So the case was argued, it was only about a week and a half ago, give or take. But it was two separate cases that the U.S. Supreme Court consolidated. It was Loper Bright versus Raimondo was one of them. And the second one was Relentless, I think it was called. But I'm fairly certain that both were the names of fishing boats. Okay. And what's going on is since 1984, we've had a case on the books called Chevron. I think it was Chevron versus Natural Resource Defense Council. Okay. And the Supreme Court held in that case in 1984, okay, that if the legislature, if Congress passes a law and it doesn't address precisely the scenario that's presented, okay, then the executive branch agency can fill in the blanks.
So they can kind of write their own law. They have the authority has been now handed over to them.
Right. And not only does the executive branch agency now have authority to fill in the gaps, okay, fill in the blanks, whatever it is. Not only that, okay, but the courts actually give deference to whatever the executive agency decided. Okay. So, I mean, you can think of a lot of examples where that would matter because let's face it, I mean, legislators can't think of every in and out of every single law they come up with, right? And so these executive agencies would just fill in the blanks and come up with some policy to address that particular set of circumstances. And like the rationale behind it was, well, these guys are experts. They're trained in their field and they know better than you do. So we'll defer to them. Well, the problem with that is over these last 40 years, believe it or not, seemingly every interpretation of every rule acceded to, more government power.
Yeah.
And these agencies would grow and grow and grow. And, like we don't get any say in those things. I mean, we don't get to go to the agency or vote for somebody to change what that policy is going to be because that's just an executive branch agency. So that falls under whoever the president's going to be. So there's nothing we can do to change those things. So that's been in place for 40 years. And depending on your perspective, okay, I mean, from the liberty-minded perspective, from the small government perspective, okay, it's been very destructive. We've lost a lot of power to executive agencies. So this case that was argued a week and a half ago was about a fishing boat, 2 fishing boats. And I think it was Fisheries and Wildlife, probably, okay, was the executive agency. And they had created a regulation to say that those fishing boats have to have room for a federal government employee. They have to allow the government employee to be on the fishing boat with them to see if they're following the law, if they're catching the number of fish that they're supposed to be and fishing in the areas they're supposed to be fishing in, or and so the owner of the fishing boat said, well, we got like 5 spots. And we don't have a lot of extra food and room. And I mean, can that guy clean fish or no? Because like we need help with that kind of stuff.
Yeah. That's 20% of the people on the boat.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And the executive agency said, yeah, sorry, no, that's what our regulation says. And the courts defer. The courts say, well, you know best. So I guess.
So this was not a law that was discussed in courtrooms and, they decided that this was the right judicial thing. This is something that this organization on the side pushed through because that was that aligned with their agenda. Right. And there was no real due process with this. And therefore, all of a sudden, you've got individuals that are in a really difficult situation where 20% of our workforce is now gone because this agency just came in and said, you have to adapt to our way of doing things.
Exactly. Exactly. And no meaningful recourse. So they litigated these 2 fishing boats, and the U.S. Supreme Court consolidated the cases and heard it. And it's looking like, I mean, fingers crossed, who knows? Oral arguments, I think, were 3 hours a week and a half ago. But it's looking like the court is seriously considering doing away with the Chevron doctrine, doing away with Chevron deference, which means, these cases are going to be interpreted by the courts, rather than the executive agencies. It does mean that the legislature is going to have to be a little bit more specific when they draft some of these laws. Okay. So they might actually have to put more time in. Working on, laws and stuff, which is what they're supposed to be doing anyway. But yeah, I mean, it would be for liberty-minded people, it's a great thing. And we'll see. I mean, U.S. Supreme Court's on their own time. You never know what they're going to do, but it's favorable, so it's leaning in the right direction. Anyway.
Yeah. Because for the hearer there, they might say, well, I don't own a fishing boat. Why does that affect me? But that kind of principle and that way of doing things, that's going to affect not just a fishing industry, right? This can affect so many different industries. And it can affect, from someone who is coming at it from a Christian perspective. If there's going to be things that would be enforced on, let's say, the church, or let's just say whether or not what a Christian can do in their own home or things like that, that they should have the freedom in order to do. If those things get dealt with in the court, we have to trust some of that system. But if these things can be done on the side by institutions that have no checks and balances and no control, and we don't have any say in, that really does endanger not just the fishing industry, but it can endanger, almost any industry, right?
Name it. Yeah. Education, agriculture, you name it. Absolutely. It's any executive agency you could think of. That's how broad this is.
Do you know if this is, I mean, I'm sure it has. Do you know any specifics of maybe that happening in the educational realm? Because that's one where I could see a huge red flag and danger.
Too many times to count.
Yeah.
Too many times. Now, can I point you to a specific example? No, but that's because there really aren't any.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, people don't have, you don't get recourse in the courts. You only get limited access to the courts to have them interpret these things because of Chevron deference.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it's going to be very big.
Yeah.
It'll change a lot of things in Washington.
Yeah.
So
what are some other things that you've seen as you just watch kind of governmental overreach or just groups of individuals that have their own specific, motivations? Have you seen cases or examples where these things are affecting like the educational system or other areas that we should be concerned of as Christians?
Yeah. I mentioned before we started talking about, Crown College. There's a case involving Crown College right now. I think it's Lowe versus Walls, I think it is.
Which is a Christian college here in Minnesota.
Right. Yep. Thank you. And my colleague, James Dickey, my friend at Upper Midwest Law Center, I'm of counsel for them, kind of outside counsel. I do some work on some cases with them from time to time.
Mm-hmm.
They're a pro-liberty, pro-freedom organization. And what happened was that the state changed the laws as it pertains to getting high school credit at colleges.
Mm-hmm.
And so because Crown College is a Christian college, they're no longer giving that option to gain college credit, for high school students.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I mean, it's happening. I think that one, I'm not sure what stage of litigation that one's at right now. But yeah, it's happening quickly. The other thing I mentioned to you was there's a case out of northern Minnesota that's really interesting that was filed just a week ago. A northern Minnesota case involving a farmer,
mm-hmm.
and the state had set up it's called Nisler versus Walls, I think it is. The state had set up a program, where new farmers, people who wanted to start their own family farm, could get a state grant of
Mm-hmm.
up to $15,000.
Mm-hmm.
And you had to be a first-time farmer. You had to have earned less than $250,000 the year before.
Mm-hmm.
You had to actively farm the land that they gave you the grant to purchase. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
But then preference was given to certain preferred people based
Mm-hmm.
on race, based on gender, based on sexual preference.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Those groups were favored over those who
Did not
have
fit
the
those
preferred.
demographics. Yeah.
That's exactly right. So the plaintiff in that case applied
Mm-hmm.
for the $15,000 grant, and ultimately was denied because he wasn't the right skin color,
Mm-hmm.
and because he wasn't the right gender.
Yeah.
And so it's a 1983 suit. It's a 14th Amendment, equal protection
Mm-hmm.
suit.
Mm-hmm.
And that was just filed last week,
Mhm.
maybe week before last, in Minnesota District Court.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, there are good people who are fighting the good fight in Minnesota, and we absolutely have cause for optimism. Not just Minnesota, nationwide.
Yeah.
I mean, people are waking up to things very, very quickly now,
Mm-hmm.
and I think we've turned the corner. I think there's a lot of cause for optimism. But
That's good. Yeah.
Yeah.
What about with your case with, I can say the name, right, of who you
Mhm.
represent? Yeah. So
Mhm.
Dr. Scott Jensen,
Mhm.
right? He ran for governor here in Minnesota, and you defended him, or you're defending him right now, correct? Can you walk us through what took place there?
Sure. So, yeah, speaking of government overreach.
Yeah.
So the government is allowed to regulate the practice of medicine,
Mm-hmm.
okay? But it's not allowed to regulate speech. So with that in mind, okay, Scott was a state senator from this part of the state, from Carver County.
Mm-hmm.
And he became a pretty prominent voice when it came to the COVID lockdowns and restrictions and masks and all that sort of thing.
Yeah.
He's also a family physician
Mhm.
here. So in early 2020, right about the time the COVID mandates began to roll out, Scott was a very vocal critic of the executive branch solution to the problem, right?
Which, how did that manifest here? The executive branch solution.
Mask mandates. There were restrictions on travel. You couldn't. I'm trying to think what sort of lockdowns there were. There were businesses that were shut down. Okay. Forced closures of restaurants and bars and things like that. Aside from the whole stickers on the floor thing, which never made any sense to me.
Yeah.
Plexiglass and 2x4s. Okay. The whole whatever.
Which I don't know if it was the case here, but I know in Wyoming, I think it was Wyoming. No, it was in Minnesota, I believe, because it was someone we've had on the show before, Ryan McPherson.
Okay.
He lived close to the Iowa border, so he was down in, I think, Mankato. And he said that at the time, the churches by the government were mandated to stay closed. And at the same time, liquor stores and Planned Parenthood were both allowed to stay open.
Correct.
Right. So he would drive down to Iowa, which had different rules, and go to church there. And in the process, he had to drive on Sunday morning past open Planned Parenthoods and open liquor store, but he couldn't go to his local church without his local church being persecuted. Right. So this is where that kind of overreach is dangerous.
Right.
Right. And therefore, fighting and defending these types of things, they are important, because that's, once again, just ludicrous, right?
No, it's crazy.
Yeah.
It reminds me, my dad told me a story, northern Minnesota, okay, his church in northern Minnesota. He told me a story about pulling into the parking lot and so this is fantastic. By that, I mean absurd. So the vehicles didn't park in each stall. Okay. They left one stall between each other by rule. Okay. And so they parked one stall apart, and then the pastor had one of those devices where you can broadcast on whatever frequency is 87.9 or whatever it was.
Okay.
And he stood on one end of the parking lot and broadcasted, and all the cars tuned in to 87.9 on their radio. So that way there wouldn't be any face-to-face contact. Everybody's 6 feet apart, even in their cars. And law enforcement came and broke it up.
Did they really?
Yeah. Not too dangerous.
Yeah.
Not okay.
Yeah, of course.
Too risky.
But you can go down the street and have an abortion at Planned Parenthood.
Yeah.
No big deal.
Right. And go to Target as long as you saran wrap off every other aisle.
Yeah.
That's okay.
Yeah.
Safety. Insane. Anyway, where was I with that? Okay. Sorry. So Scott was a very vocal critic at this point, okay, of the governor's solution, okay, to the problem. So he made some media appearances, okay, and the Department of Health in Minnesota changed its guidance about what constitutes a COVID death and what doesn't constitute a COVID death, okay. But Scott, made his voice heard, and he wound up getting some national attention. He was on Fox News and whatever, and made some comments and saying, "Hey, I don't agree. I don't think this is necessary. I don't think it's safe." And specifically with regard to the death certificates in Minnesota, okay, the guidance changed, and he called out what he thought was wrong, And time has proven him right, by the way. Nevertheless, so it wasn't long after he left the Senate in early 2020 that he got his first complaint by the Board of Medical Practice. And they said, "Hey, we saw you made these comments to this newspaper or this TV station, or you posted this on social media. We suspect this might be a violation of your license to practice medicine. So we want a response. You need to give us a written response. How do you respond to these allegations?" And so he kind of said, he knew there was something wrong, okay, but maybe he couldn't quite put his finger on it. But, the question is, where does practicing medicine end and where does speech begin? Okay. So that was the first complaint. He put together a long response to that. It took a lot of time to prepare his response, a lot of time. Okay. I mean, because let's face it, it's your livelihood, right? This is your job. He's been a family physician for a long, long time. And that's his first passion, always has been. So he put his response together, and the complaint was dismissed, okay, within a couple of months. I think it took 2 or 3 months, and the next complaint showed up. Same thing. You said this to this TV station. You said this to the newspaper. You posted this on your social media page. And put together response number 2. Then it happened again. That one was dismissed. Same thing happened again the 3rd time. This time it was for signing his name onto a lawsuit in Alabama, a federal lawsuit in Alabama, connected to the requiring kids to take the COVID shots.
They were requiring that in Alabama?
Right.
Were they really?
It was under consideration.
Okay.
And I'm not sure the stage that it was at exactly in Alabama, but this lawsuit, Scott had submitted an affidavit connected to this lawsuit, saying, hey, let's just be careful here.
Yeah.
Pump the brakes. Let's think about what we're doing before we do it.
Yeah.
And so the Minnesota Board of Medical Practice said, we understand that you signed your name onto a lawsuit and you're trying to prevent children from getting, life-saving
mandatory
or whatever.
vaccines.
Right. And so what's your response to that? And so at this point, it's like, okay, so now he's been investigated a couple times for pure speech. And now, like, there's the weird clause, in the First Amendment about petitioning the government for redress of grievances. What does that mean? It means the right to sue. So now the new investigation is over a lawsuit, putting your name on a lawsuit. That's not practicing medicine. That's not even close to practicing medicine. So he responded. That one was dismissed. Then we get a 4th one. And again, none of these involve the practice of medicine. That one was dismissed. And ultimately, there was a 5th complaint that was brought against them. And the 5th and final complaint, I think, came in, I think it came in January of last year. But the second to last complaint was held open for the entirety of his campaign for governor.
On purpose? You can't say, but.
Let me put it this way. There are 2 statutes. One says that any complaint that the Board of Medical Practice gets has to be resolved within, I believe it's 3 months, might be 4. Sorry, that's wrong. They have to give a status update. They have to tell them, here's where we are with it. It's still open. We're working on it. We'll let you know. The second statute says that all complaints have to be resolved within a year. This was held open. The complaint was commenced in November or December of 21 and held open all the way through campaign season.
Which he's running for governor again.
Which he's running for governor all the way through 2022. And nothing happened until after the campaign, after the election was over in early 2023.
Or I'm guessing it was dismissed.
So no, the last one, he received a notice of conference where they revived all of the previously dismissed complaints and
Seriously?
then added a couple more. So, and that's when Scott called me and the 2 of us sat down and he showed me this. And immediately I was like, wait a minute, what? You're kidding me. I mean, this isn't, not only is this not practice of medicine, but these are core speech issues. The reason the framers did this with the First Amendment is to protect exactly these rights. The right to challenge your government, the right to question your government about exactly these things was to protect people like Scott. And that's exactly what they went after. So the last set, I think it was 18 total complaints. And 18 that he'd received. Now we know where those complaints came from, or some of the complaints came from. Facebook posts. These were like, we don't, it's still bearing itself out, but these were in the nature of political criticisms. None of these were from patients. Not one patient filed a complaint against Scott. So these were all critiques of his core protected First Amendment rights. So that was the action against his license. And we had the hearing in front of the Board of Medical Practice, the administrative hearing. Or the internal hearing in front of the board. And all 18 of those we got dismissed. And then last summer, last June, we made the decision, that we were going to go on the offense and we were going to call them out and say, this is wrong. You can't do this to people, particularly when you're in the middle of a political campaign for governor. But we just made the decision that we can't let them get away with this. So we sued under 1983 for First Amendment violations. And so we sued the Board of Medical Practice and a number of its members. And right now the case is the state made a motion to dismiss. So the Attorney General's office represents the Board of Medical Practice. So they made a motion to dismiss the case like last, maybe August.
Okay.
We had the hearing in, I believe it was December, early December.
Mm-hmm.
And right now we're waiting. So it's on the judge's desk right now. He's deciding whether they're going to dismiss. You have some little issues with like immunity under certain circumstances. The members of the board get immunity under certain circumstances. Okay. Not these. Okay. That's our argument. But yeah, so it's on his desk right now. So we'll see how it goes. But it's nuanced. Okay. Because you look at the set of circumstances and you think, well, but he's a doctor. Okay. And this was their position. This was the board's position. Okay. But you're a doctor. And so you have to be saying the right things to people who listen to you because you have a big platform, right? You have this social media platform and you're being interviewed, by various media outlets. So what you say has to be responsible, because what if someone listens to what you say and because they didn't wear a mask, they get COVID and die? Okay. Or what if someone doesn't listen to you, or someone thinks what you're giving is advice and they refrain from doing X, which would have saved their life. Okay. In other words, isn't there a higher standard that applies because you're a doctor? Okay. And the answer is no. I mean, the Supreme Court precedent is really clear. There's no separate category for professional speech. There's either speech or there's practice of medicine. But there is nothing in between. There is no professional speech standard. Very well settled. So it doesn't matter that he has a medical license. You don't surrender your right to free speech when you become a doctor or a lawyer or have any other professional license in Minnesota. You're not the property of the Board of Medical Practice. So your First Amendment rights are protected more so than they've ever been when you make comments as a doctor, public comments concerning medicine or government policy connected to medicine.
Yeah.
Which really, that's what it was. It was in the nature of a political criticism. Yeah. You're not treating anyone. There's no nexus between the patient and the doctor. It's pure public political speech.
Yeah.
So,
well, I mean, two thoughts there. I mean, one is you said it earlier. Time has shown that actually the kind of things he was saying have actually been proven right. Right. So are they concerned with people who said things that time has proven to be wrong, but were popular at the time, right? So if you go back to whenever he's speaking in 2020, 2021, most of the people that were on that had a public platform, right, that were speaking to large numbers of people, that's their concern, right? Time has proven that what they said was wrong. So are they also reacting against those people, or are those people immune because they went with what was popular at the time?
We both know the answer to that.
Yeah.
And so it's funny you mentioned that, because one of the counts of our complaint was he's a class of one. It's an equal protection violation because he's a class of one. They went after him because he espoused this viewpoint, but they didn't go after anyone else for espousing a contrary viewpoint. That is to say, they didn't investigate anyone for speaking the preferred speech. Okay. The narrative that the government was advancing. They weren't investigated. It was this. So it was pure content-based restrictions. Yeah. Which means it triggers strict scrutiny. I mean, these are our fundamental core freedoms. So yeah, great question.
Because that seems like the chief danger that applies to many other circumstances as well, right? Is that the way the law is supposed to work is the law is supposed to be some kind of representation of objectivity, right? And we all are supposed to, I mean, it's not okay to go kill your neighbor because you're angry at him. Like, that's an objective statement that we have, and the law backs that. And therefore, no matter who you are, no matter what your skin color is, no matter what, you can't go do that, right? So that's the objectivity. Right. So the goal in this area should also be some kind of objectivity, but what you're painting is that what they're not looking for objectivity or over time figuring out what is right. They're saying, we have agreed that this is right and that's wrong. We're not submitting to some kind of scientific fact, right? And then they're using that as a weapon to target someone who disagrees with. And that can be used in any sphere. That can be used in an educational sphere. It can certainly be used in a church sphere where they can say, marriage is an example, right? Where we've redefined the definition of marriage, and that's changed just in, the last, 10, 15 years.
Right.
So now that has changed, And now they can use that as a weapon against, anyone who's a Christian who might want to run for office. Certainly they might target that individual, or if they want to, they can wield that against a cake maker. Right. And that's an abuse of government oversight.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's a content-based restriction.
Okay.
And the bottom line is, okay, even if Scott were completely wrong, even if the advice that he were giving people was totally off base, okay, even if he was lying about it, it's still protected. It's protected core speech. And that's why it's there, because the founding fathers recognized the danger in letting government decide which speech is acceptable and which speech isn't acceptable. Okay. So the fact that he was espousing, and some freedoms are really easy to protect. The freedom to go volunteer. Okay. That one's an easy one.
Yeah.
Well, I want to go volunteer at the soup kitchen. I want to serve food. No problem. You can do that. Okay. The freedom to eat too many Krispy Kreme donuts, the freedoms that can be harmful for you. Okay. Those are the ones that really matter. Those are the ones you have to protect. Again, as it turned out in this case, okay, what Scott was saying wasn't harming people at all. There was nothing harmful. Okay. It was purely political attacks against him. But nevertheless, even if it's content based, it's strict scrutiny.
So Scott, the only person who has this happen to them?
Absolutely not.
Yeah.
And it makes you wonder, I mean, if this was done to someone that prominent who was running for governor, how many physicians across Minnesota just kept their mouth shut? I mean, I'll tell you, I mean, before he made the decision to run for governor, okay, he talked to his wife. It wasn't an easy decision to make, okay? And when he made the decision, he had already been through a couple of these crazy investigations, okay? But when he made the decision to run, he talked to his wife and he said, hey, my fallback at least will be, I can still practice medicine. And then he announced, and it was not long after that where he got complaint number 4. It's like, okay, well, how many people, I mean, it took courage to do that on his part, but how many doctors just kept their mouth shut? I don't know the answer to that. The board probably does, but I don't. So, yeah. Yeah.
So you mentioned another case that you're doing recently that might be going to Supreme Court. Was it this week? Does that rhyme with this one?
Next week.
Yeah. I mean, we don't have to jump to a completely different area. I think there's more to explore here as well. But
it's not quite related to this one.
Okay.
It's government overreach. Okay. And I'm defending a city council member up in Columbia Heights. It's overreach, yes, but it's a different. It's not really a constitutional question. I mean, it sort of tangentially is, but it's more. You have it's sort of a direct democracy thing. So in Minnesota, you have you ever initiative and referendum? Does that ring a bell?
No.
Or initiative, referendum, recall. Okay. Basically, what they are different ways where voters can enact legislation themselves. They can go around the city council and they can bring about new laws in their city. Okay. So we have, in Minnesota, we have 2 types of cities. We have charter cities and statutory cities.
Okay.
All the biggest cities in Minnesota are charter cities. And charter cities kind of operate on their own constitution. Okay. That's their own charter. It's sort of neutered. Okay. They don't have as much power as they used to have because over the years, it's kind of been gradually eroded by the courts. Okay. Nevertheless, okay, those are the 2 types of cities. And what sets them apart are these 3 ideas of initiative, referendum, and recall. So initiative is the ability for voters to get together, gather enough signatures, okay, and bring about a change in legislation. So if they don't like something, they can go to t-ball tournaments and soccer tournaments and softball tournaments and stand on street corners and whatever, collect signatures and say, we think that there should be a 10 p.m. curfew in the city of, Bloomington, wherever it is. Okay. And if they can collect enough signatures, okay, and if enough people agree with them, then that petition goes to the city government, and it goes around the city council, and it goes directly to a vote.
Okay.
And if enough of the city agrees, then that initiative becomes a new ordinance in that city, and that's what it is. Okay. Referendum is when the city council passes something and the voters have a set amount of time. Usually it's around 30 days, give or take. And if the voters don't like what the city council passed, same thing, go collect some signatures, say, hey, we think they're wrong about this. Then that also goes around the city council, assuming procedural sufficiency, whatever, assuming that the law is not constitutional or it's not unconstitutional.
Yeah.
Okay? It goes around the city council, goes straight to the voters. If the voters agree, then the law goes away. It's a referendum.
Yeah.
Okay. It undoes what the city council did. If they don't agree, then, the petitioners lose. And then the third one is recall. And that is when you elect someone, okay, and they commit malfeasance in office. And that the term matters because malfeasance means something. You don't just get to make up, what you think is malfeasance, okay? The courts have interpreted that over the years, all right? And it matters because that's one of the things being litigated, next week at the Minnesota Supreme Court is this idea of malfeasance, okay? Anyway, if you, same thing, collect enough signatures, then you can recall, kick them out of office.
Yeah.
Okay. So as you can imagine, okay, voters challenging the authority of city councils, it's not received very well.
Yeah.
Because city councils, like any other government, doesn't like someone who tests their power, right? And not every charter city has all these rights for their people, okay? Minneapolis doesn't have initiative rights, okay? You can't do it. I don't believe they have referendum either, okay? So it's nominally a charter city, but it's sort of a, soft charter city. Anyway.
Okay.
But the one next week, I represent a city council member up in Columbia Heights, okay? And the easiest way to think of it is that the rest of the city council is by and large ideologically opposed to her, okay? So they took something that happened that she was alleged to have done, and they blew it up into malfeasance. And a group of residents up there put together a petition and thought they were doing it the way they were supposed to do it. There were procedural mistakes, so part of the suit is about that. But the heart of it really is that they didn't accuse her of malfeasance, okay? But the rest of the city council overlooked that, and the mayor, and said, well, yeah, we don't know whether this is malfeasance or not, but you know what? There's enough signatures there, and we're going to hold the election anyway.
Really?
Right.
Because if they accuse, then you have to prove that actually took place, right?
Right. Malfeasance has to be alleged. Right.
Okay.
So you at least the conduct that they describe in this petition has to constitute malfeasance if true.
Okay.
What's malfeasance? Commission of a crime. Okay. Not a misdemeanor necessarily. Okay. But commission of a serious crime, a felony in office.
Yeah.
Okay. Bribery. All right. Theft. The things you'd think of. Betrayal of public trust. Okay. But it has to be malfeasance in office. Okay. It has to be connected to your duties as a city council member.
Basically, you're abusing your position.
Precisely.
Okay.
Yep. That is that's malfeasance. Okay. This involved a single private phone call, okay, that was placed supposedly from my client to someone else who was running for city council the year prior, one phone call. Nobody else would have heard about the phone call if it weren't for the rest of the city council publicizing the thing, right?
Yeah.
So the question is, how is it malfeasance in office if you're making a private call in the evening, even if she did do it? Okay. Anyway, so my argument was that malfeasance wasn't alleged because that conduct doesn't constitute malfeasance in office. Okay. To date, the city hasn't argued that it does constitute malfeasance. Okay. But the easiest way to think about it is this is what weaponized government looks like. I mean, the other council members ganged up. Some of them helped to circulate the signature pages. Okay. They ganged up on her and they voted, and now we've got an election, and she's looking at being recalled from office for something that has nothing to do with malfeasance
Mm-hmm.
and is rife with procedural defects.
Mm-hmm.
But because she was outnumbered 4-1, well, the election got called.
Yeah.
And so we sued to try to stop the election. And so the hearing's next week. The election's scheduled for February 13th. So today's Wednesday. So a little less than 2 weeks from today,
Mm-hmm.
the election is scheduled to take place. So early voting's already begun.
Yeah.
But I assume by the time this probably airs, this will all be over with.
Okay. Yeah.
But we basically sued to stop the election,
Mm-hmm.
to say this isn't malfeasance and there's procedural problems. Don't do this, guys.
Mm-hmm.
Just stop. But anyway.
That's a mess.
Yes, it's a
There's
mess.
a lot. Yeah.
Right. It's a mess.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I could go into more detail, but the legislature wrote a statute that says, this form is the form. This is a tangent, but this form is the form that you have to use when you collect signatures on these petitions. It has to have a line for this. It has to have this information. It's got to have a date. It has to have an oath.
Mm-hmm.
An oath that says you're only signing this once. You understand what this is about. You have to have your city. You have to have your county of residence. I think it is 10 lines per page, et cetera, et cetera. The legislature said this applies to all elections, all petitions for all elections in the state of Minnesota. The secretary is empowered to make this rule that applies to everything and everybody.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Then the Secretary of State puts together the regulation, 12 or 13 different requirements for each form, each petition page. But the charter city, being Columbia Heights, that's who we're suing against here, has its own set of rules.
Mm.
It says we don't need to have a date on the signature page. All you have to do is sign it, and then you put your address, and we call it a day.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what they did. So the signers of the petition weren't at fault. They did what they thought they were supposed to do. Okay. But the fact is that the state law says it applies to everything,
Mm-hmm.
all elections in all cities across the state of Minnesota.
Mm.
So that's the other part of the argument. So there's two. There's the malfeasance question, and then there's the petition question, the procedural question.
Yeah. Well, I think why I find this fascinating, right, is that we see, someone that's not plugged into this like myself,
Mm-hmm.
right? I mean, that's not my profession's not seeing what's going on kind of behind the scenes, but we see so many things that take place, and we'll see some absurdity or something. We might just get highlights of it or whatnot, but just seeing the small steps, like all the work that's put in behind the scenes that's leading to, for yourself, fighting for these rights that need to be upheld.
Sure.
But from the other side, right, like manipulating and trying to get around these things, right? And it happens in so many areas. And that's why I want people listening to understand the different areas that this goes on, right?
Sure.
And there's so many interesting ones. And I want to ask you about a couple other ones. I'm going to run to the restroom real quick.
Sure.
So let's take a quick break.
Yeah, sounds great.
Okay. All right. And we're back. So let's do maybe one more example of some chicanery that's going on.
Sure.
And
Sure. Yep.
And then I want to just ask you about some kind of things that are going on right now in the country, and just, use your legal eyes to see what's going on behind the surface. But do you have one more example for us?
Oh, yeah, sure. We litigated a case a few years ago involving ballot boards. Okay. What are ballot boards? Well, when you have an election, you have absentee ballots. The absentee ballots come in. Well, somebody's got to count those, right? Because it's not election day, but someone's got to figure out who voted how.
Mm-hmm.
So the legislature, to address that issue, wrote this ballot board statute. And you can see it covers, I think, 2 or 3 different statutes. And the common theme among all these statutes is, okay, you got a board of people, and the board has to be balanced by party. Okay, the idea is you want to have fairness. You want to have half Democrats, half Republicans, because the way the law is written, those are the only 2 parties it applies to. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
there isn't a third major party. Okay, so in practice, you're talking about Democrats and Republicans doing the counting. Okay, so all these statutes are written for this ballot board to be comprised of party balanced ballot board members. Okay, specifically, ballot boards have to be comprised of election judges and deputy county auditors.
Okay. And what are those?
That's a great question. I'm glad you asked. Yes. A deputy county auditor is appointed by the county auditor. And because of the way the statute is written, okay, it's a weird throw-in, but the reason it's there is because some of these smaller counties just don't get very many absentee ballots that come in. I mean, election day is big for them, but some of the counties in Minnesota are very sparsely populated, and it didn't make sense that they would have to bring in separate people that are party balanced to count such a small number of ballots.
A couple hundred or
right. A couple hundred ballots. Exactly.
Couple hours of work.
Couple hours of work.
Yeah.
Right. Now, why do we have to bring in people to, right? So deputy county auditor, it's fine, do that. Well, because of the way it's written, okay, and some would argue it was deliberate, okay, the deputy county auditors don't have to be party balanced.
Mm-hmm.
The election judges do, but the deputy county auditors don't. So believe it or not, we've seen an incredible proliferation of deputy county auditors in urban areas, particularly in Minneapolis.
Where there's only a couple hundred absentee ballots, right?
Right.
In Minneapolis.
A couple hundred absentee ballots. Right. You get it.
Yeah.
So it was really clear what was being done was to avoid party balance in counting these absentee ballots rather than, appointing the same number of election judges from each party. Everybody became a deputy county auditor. And believe it or not, the deputy county auditors weren't balanced by party. Instead, they looked a lot more like those from favored political perspectives.
Do you have any guess of what the percentage was? So this is like Minneapolis doing this, right?
Yeah.
Is it like 51 to 49?
Oh, no. Vastly more.
Like
vastly
60,
more county
40?
auditors than that. It's been a few years. I have to look at the numbers.
But I'm probably not very close.
No. Far more deputy county auditors. Far more. Not close.
Yeah.
So anyway, we litigated that case as well, and unfortunately didn't go our way. But it's just another examples. I mean, those are the kind of things that the legislature has to change, in order for us to make any progress on it. But that's another example of something that you and I probably would have never thought of.
Right.
And I mean, look, it makes sense to have party balance. You want to have, people to make sure that there aren't any shenanigans going on.
Right.
But
so in other words, they put forward something that seems very reasonable probably to everyone, particularly when this is passed. We want people on both sides. Let's get close to 50-50, and that way there's no foul play, right? I don't think anyone's going to say that sounds absurd. That seems very reasonable. And then they come up with something else that seems reasonable, which is, hey, we've got this small little county here. There's 100 absentee ballots. Do we have to go through this? That's okay. Just bring somebody in and they can appoint, right?
Yeah.
And then you're going about your daily business. You're having breakfast with your kids, and someone else across the way is plotting and saying, wait a second, if we apply this here, we can go against this kind of 50-50 balance and get some kind of absurd number. I don't know why they would want to do that. But point being, people plot, and we should be wary of people plotting. 100%.
Yep. And, idle hands do the devil's work. Right? There's tying.
Yeah.
So, they come up with all kinds of crazy, clever stuff. And then you look at it and say, wow, in theory, that was really, really good. But now in practice, that's really a disaster.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
So let me ask you, so yourself or any of the people that some of the organizations you work with and stuff, do you guys have a lot of meetings where you guys kind of try to plot to undermine the legal system in order to get certain agendas across? Is that something that you guys spend your time doing?
No. We don't have time to do that. I mean, it's too much work to try to catch up with everything that they're trying to get away with.
Yeah.
I mean, look, until I think, 3-4 years ago, something like that, Upper Midwest Law Center, the nonprofit that I associate with, 501c3. Okay. It's dedicated to liberty-minded litigation. We don't get grants from high up, we don't get Soros money, but yeah, it's a full-time gig. I mean, James works there very hard, and Doug Seaton's the president there. He does an outstanding job, but James works harder than anybody I've ever met. I mean, he's burning the candle at both ends because we're fighting from behind, but we're fighting and we're winning important battles. I mean, so we can talk about it more later, but I'm optimistic about where things are headed because.
Well, do you want to walk through some of that optimism right now?
Mhm,
I mean,
sure.
feel free. I mean, yeah.
Mhm.
Because I mean, the one thing that stands out to me here, and this is why I think this is really important, is just there are people out there plotting to undermine the system as it is, which is a very reasonable system. Like that example you gave of like, well, let's just get 50-50 in the room, right? Like very reasonable.
Mm-hmm.
And you're not going about saying, let's figure out a way to undo that. I know that I can't go and tell everybody, hey, does everyone agree publicly? Can we just have a public debate? And does everyone agree that we should go 80-20 or 90-10? Does that seem reasonable? Obviously it wouldn't,
Right.
But you and most people are not sitting here and saying, let's undermine these reasonable things for some reason. Right. But people are out there doing that, which is why what you're doing and some of the people that you mentioned, right, these things are really important because people are on the attack. Right. You're not on the attack. You're on the defense of trying to uphold these things that are very reasonable.
Right. Yep. Absolutely. So, and I think you and I talked about this before. Politics is when you have an outcome that everybody agrees on, but you disagree on how to get there.
Mm-hmm.
That's red team, blue team stuff. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And that's cool. That's what our system is set up to do.
Mm-hmm.
You know, how do we make life better? Well, we want this. We want prosperity. We want family. We want business. We want success, whatever. Peace. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
How do we achieve that? Two sides disagree. You argue. You reach a compromise. And then ideally, you achieve the goal.
Mm-hmm.
But when it's not, you know, when you don't have a common goal, that's not politics anymore.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that's something else.
Mm-hmm.
Then that's the battle that we're talking about. Then there are people trying to achieve different ends.
Mm-hmm.
So our system's not set up for that. So this is new. A lot of this stuff is new, you know, including, there's a segue, including what's happening in Texas.
Yeah.
It's fascinating because it is a constitutional crisis, what's
Mm-hmm.
happening in Texas.
Yeah, which I'm fascinated by. So please walk us through this. 'Cause this is historical, right? This is
absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And frankly, if it was any other state, it might be different.
Mm-hmm.
But the fact that Texas was a republic once, you
Yeah.
know, anyway,
which by the way, we're gonna air this in 2 weeks. So for those watching, this is fresh. So
right.
Normally we've got a little bit of a leeway for our own sanity, right? That we're not scrambling to have next week's
Right.
video, but we are going to move this one up the list because some of the things you're talking about, such as this, is a little more time sensitive. I don't know what it's going to look like 3 months from now, so I want this conversation to be relative. So this is within 2 weeks of what you're hearing.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So Texas has, I think there are a few different resources. They have the Texas National Guard. Then they sort of have two different Texas like public safety militia type groups. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
But they're state agencies. So in other words, Minnesota has like the state troopers,
Mm-hmm.
and they fall under the governor's jurisdiction because they're a statewide, law enforcement agency. Same thing with the DNR. Okay. The Department of Natural Resources. That's a state law enforcement agency. So they serve at the pleasure of the governor.
Mm-hmm.
Texas has, I think, 2 or 3 of those little subgroups, other than the National Guard, that serve at the pleasure of the governor. So the governor declared, under the Constitution, Greg Abbott,
Mm-hmm.
declared an invasion. And he said, look, we don't have any ability to control what's happening here. Okay, the federal government's abdicated its duty to defend our border.
Mm-hmm.
And the whole country's suffering for it. I mean, to the tunes of millions of people, depending on whose numbers you believe. And anybody who tells you they know how many people came into the country is lying to you.
Mm-hmm.
They don't know. We have no idea. We don't
Mm-hmm.
know who they are. We don't know how many there are. We have no idea.
Mm-hmm.
So Abbott said, we're done. We're declaring an invasion. And therefore, we, the Texas National Guard and these other subgroups, are going to secure the border.
Mm-hmm.
And the Biden administration pushed back and said, no, you're not. That's our job.
Mm-hmm.
And we want to cut the razor wire. So that's what we're going to do. So now really you have both parties acting under constitutional authority, under color of the Constitution. And I don't know what's going to happen. I believe Abbott and Ken Paxton, the Attorney General in Texas, who's fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, very liberty-minded, conservative, constitutionalist.
Yeah.
I think they're both going to dig their heels in. And you see now, 25 states that have declared in favor of Texas.
25 have.
25.
When we talked last, was it 10?
It was 10.
So it's 25 now.
25. And I believe 10 of them have actually sent National Guard troops to Texas to help reinforce the border. And the scuttlebutt now is that there are calls for Washington to nationalize the Texas National Guard, which they can do. Okay, it's within their authority to do that.
Mm-hmm.
They haven't done it yet. I don't know what would happen if they do.
Mm-hmm.
But I do know I'm reading reports down there that National Guard, Texas National Guard, and Border Patrol are not. I mean, they're getting along just fine.
Yeah.
And it isn't like they're well, my orders say this and my orders say that, and they're like, no.
So the people on the ground, they're working together. They've got a shared vision, and they've got unity there.
All indications are that's right.
Mm-hmm.
That's right. But it's really a fascinating constitutional question.
Yeah.
And I don't know which way it's going to go, and time will tell. But you just don't hear a lot about it,
mm-hmm.
which in and of itself is telling. But yeah, it's fascinating. So we'll see.
So a couple questions. One, does Abbott, what's Abbott's reasoning for saying invasion? Like, what are some statistics there? Or not enough statistics are the right words, but what's going on there with that claim?
Right. I think he said, look, there isn't the law says you have to detain. Okay, detain until they have a hearing.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, to decide on whether they're going to be admitted to the country or not. There's a vetting process.
Mm-hmm.
Immigration, not migration. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
Migration is one thing. Migration is groups moving. Birds migrate.
Yeah. Yeah.
Herd animals migrate. Okay, but people, this is new. So this isn't immigration. Immigration is when you have a process to
Mm-hmm.
vet people. If you want to come into the country, you got to pass these criteria. We got to know who you are, where you're from. The asylum thing, well, legit reasons. I want to know those things.
Mm-hmm. My wife went through that process. She's from Canada. She's got a green card, and we went through that process. They had to double check that what we were telling the truth.
Right, exactly. And you passed.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah.
Yeah.
Passed. That's good. I figured as much.
Yeah.
Anyway. So yeah, right. So that's a process. That's immigration. That's
Mm-hmm.
illegal immigration. Migration is just sort of willy-nilly flow from point A to point B.
Mm-hmm.
And again, all indications are that this is one of those examples where someone else has a different end goal in mind
Mm-hmm.
than the Constitution, than the best interests of this country.
Mm-hmm.
Not the same thing.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think he declared an invasion because people aren't being detained. They're being given notices to show up next year
Mm-hmm.
for court, or show up in a couple of years. We're backlogged. We're 18 months behind. But in the meantime,
Have at her.
go to Phoenix. Yeah,
Yeah.
they'll fly you to wherever you're going.
Mm-hmm.
And information's coming out now that they're actually NGOs, these non-governmental organizations they're taxpayer funded in part. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
that are facilitating these routes from Central America coming into
Really?
yes, coming into this country through Mexico after the Texas border.
And are most of these people, are these like women and children?
No. Indications are that's not the case. Indications are that these are like fighting age men.
Mm-hmm.
They're not families, and this is very, very well funded.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, now we're learning that billions of dollars are being sent, to Central America and to facilitate these routes. And anytime you have that kind of money, when you have billions of dollars, you have people who sell shoes on the way up, and people who sell rain gear, people who sell tents, people who sell food, people who transport people by boat from point A to point B to facilitate migration.
Mm-hmm.
Anytime you've got that kind of money, you have microeconomies that spring up, and that's what's going on.
Mm.
You're seeing, different facilities being constructed for migrants from different parts of the world. Signs with Chinese language on them for migrants coming from China. Okay. Yeah, it's a scene, and it's taken a long time to get to this point. And so the fix is not going to be overnight,
Mm-hmm.
but it's going to take a lot of willpower. And that's what we're seeing from Abbott and Paxton. And I hope they keep it up.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it's fascinating.
Yeah, that's worrisome, especially when you talk about, signs going up in Chinese and such. And I think you mentioned that there was, one whole camp that was there that was all fighting age Chinese men.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
that's certainly not the picture of, what your heart might go out to, of a mother and her child that are in a desperate situation and they're just looking for a way out. Right.
Right.
And your heart can go out to that. You still have a legal system and you still have to work within that confines. But from like a church perspective, I can understand looking at that from a church and saying, we need to find a way to help that woman and child. It doesn't mean we need to sneak her into the country, but we should help. But if it's a situation where there are a couple thousand Chinese fighting age men that somehow ended up in South America and are now coming into the United States, when there's no official war between the U.S. and China, but they are at odds as world powers. I mean, that's very disheartening. And I know you mentioned there's a lot of good organizations that are funding and helping this process because they're thinking woman and child. And reality, there's some other situations, which is where Abbott's looking at that front line and saying, buck's got to stop somewhere.
Right.
This has to end.
I think I think there was a letter that was written by some former law enforcement officials saying, hey, just so you know, we don't know who these guys are. Okay. These could be, and they are, okay. I think I forget how many terrorists they apprehended at the border, but these are from countries that don't like us very much.
Mm-hmm.
And how many, we don't know. Okay. We don't know how many people are in the interior of the country now, but how difficult would it be to coordinate an attack? We're not safe to assume that they have the same priorities we do.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. There are lots of countries in this world, especially right now, who really don't like us very much.
Mm-hmm.
So I think Abbott cited that as the real basis for calling it an invasion.
Mm-hmm.
Because at some level, at some point, it is.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to assume the worst if you're going to keep your people safe.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. So what are different ways this can play out?
Yeah. Well, if the federal government does nationalize the Texas National Guard, okay, which they might, my information, as far as I know, is that the installation of the razor wire is going to continue, and Texas is going to use its other resources in the form of the more local law enforcement agencies to continue that process.
Okay.
Now, is the Texas National Guard going to just line up and do as they're told by the Biden administration? I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
That's going to be fascinating to see by itself.
Mm-hmm.
If the Biden administration doesn't step in, then I expect the reinforcements to continue along the border. I don't think that's going to change.
Mm-hmm.
But what's interesting about it is that this is all happening during an election year.
Yeah.
So Biden's in a position now to have to argue to keep the border open, right? He's threatening to sue, or he's going to have to threaten to sue Texas in order to keep the migrant flow coming through the border in an election year.
I can't imagine that's
Favorable.
terribly popular.
No, not very popular. No.
Yeah.
No. Especially when you have Border Patrol agents saying the same thing as Texas National Guard agents, which is, my job is to keep this secure.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what I'm going to do. And secure is not tag and release in the interior of the country to show up for a hearing in 18 months to 2 years that they're not going to show up for.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah.
And it is astounding that we're not reading more about this every single day.
Mm-hmm.
We should be. This should be the biggest story in every newspaper on every TV station. And it's not.
Because it's historical, right? This
is absolutely historical.
This is not business as usual.
No, this is novel territory. Never been done. We've never been invaded. We have two gigantic moats on either side of us.
Yeah.
They're huge. And we have a friendly neighbor to the north in Canada and a friendly neighbor to the south in Mexico.
Mm-hmm.
We're in perfect shape to make sure we never get invaded.
Mm-hmm.
Yet, here we are.
Yeah.
So the only conclusion you can reach if you're a thinking person is that this is being done by someone or some group that doesn't have our country's interests at heart at all.
Yeah.
It's the only conclusion you can reach.
Yeah. Because if you got 5 million people that have entered in, and you take your 50 biggest cities, you can figure out how many people per se. I mean, if you wanted to do a coordinated attack, that would not be that difficult.
Oh, sure wouldn't.
If you had 30,000 people coordinated to pick up arms at a specific day in Minneapolis, what's Minneapolis going to do?
Right.
Police force going to fight back against that?
We're not set up for that.
Yeah.
Nope. You can't. Right. It wouldn't be hard at all. It'd be frighteningly easy, as a matter of fact.
Mm-hmm.
So, and like I said, we have no idea. We don't know. So yeah, it's a precarious situation, and it's an election year.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah. Pray.
Yeah.
Pray. You know, I mean, I don't know what else. Yeah. You just,
Yeah.
you pray, keep your family close,
Mm-hmm.
you know, keep your loved ones close to you, because, you know, this is God territory. This is not us territory.
Yeah.
So, yeah. We'll see.
So what else? What else should we talk about?
Well, we can talk about, we can touch on Dobbs a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah.
And what's happening with that.
In the ocean of legal battles. What are you?
Yes, there are a lot. So yeah, just to touch on it, I mean, maybe to clear up some misinformation and disinformation. Both those words I absolutely can't stand, by the way.
Misinformation and disinformation?
Right. They don't actually mean anything. We're told that they mean stuff, but they really don't.
Mm-hmm.
There's only information. And then the person who receives the information can decide, like, do I believe that information or do I not believe it? Like, there's lies. Okay, I got that. But like, you don't get to decide if it's like, you don't tell me if it's misinformation or not. I decide if it's misinformation or not, or disinformation.
Well, we just had our our video release 2 weeks ago from now. So when this goes out, within a month, with Dr. Donna Harrison, right? I'm not even gonna say what we talked about, because they'll probably scan this video, pick up that vocabulary, and this will end up getting blocked. But that one was completely, if you've ever heard the term shadow banned, it was shadow banned.
Oh yeah.
But also on top of that,
congratulations, by the way.
Yeah, thank you. That's
exciting.
it's a good badge.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Bennett's got a picture up in his room now of of actually, if you go to our YouTube page, right, and you go watch the video, right below it is normally our like or subscribe, and then description, right, where you can learn about she's an MD, But instead of that, well, it's down lower. But instead of that, you've got a misinformation tag.
Oh, you do?
With the proper information of what an abortion really is.
Oh, right.
Which I said the word, so now this is gonna. But
right,
yeah.
Right.
But that's there, and it's got, and you can go to the website and figure out what an abortion really is, because we were misinforming, of course.
Of course.
But thank God that someone's there to protect the listener, who might be hoodwinked.
Right. It's actually a loving, nurturing, caring thing. Right.
Yeah.
We're wrong because we're misinformed about that.
Yeah.
And because we're not capable of making our own judgments about such things. We only know what we're told. Then that must be misinformation.
Yeah. Because I'm sure when she was citing all of the statistics about, increased levels of suicide or depression and all of these other things, and she was citing those things. But that's probably misinformation.
Lies. Yeah. All of it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is amazing what's being done in the name of misinformation and disinformation. I mean, that we were always taught. I was a poli-sci major in undergrad at Gustavus, and you read some of the classics. You have too.
Mm-hmm.
You read some of the classics, and they always say that free speech is always the first thing to go.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember thinking, a number of years ago when I graduated, I remember thinking, like, yeah, but that's not going to happen here.
Mm-hmm.
Like, free speech can go in other countries. We have the Constitution. We have the First Amendment. That's not going to go anywhere here. Here it is.
Mm-hmm.
You're looking at it.
Yeah.
Every day, and it's death by a thousand cuts. It's subtle and it's small, but it's very real, in everything we're looking at. I mean, it's shocking. Anyway.
Well, that's a good way to put it real quick. And then but, so yeah, I spent hours that week trying to deal with Google, and officially it's not taken down, right? Because that would not be the death of a thousand cuts. That would be one big one, to your point, that something like that's when you can maybe call Greg Joseph up and say, are they allowed to just take a video down off YouTube? Right. And of course, that would be something that you'd have a case for that. I mean, I don't know if we would actually go through the process, but you could, and then you could, but they say, oh, no, everything looks good on our end. Okay, well, on our end, I can tell that I can watch what the impressions are doing, and there's no, I can see this. Right. So from their end, they're able to do this kind of behind the scenes, which is the way, once again, you have to do it. If you're going to look at a voting block and say, 50-50, that doesn't seem fair.
Right.
We want 80-20 or 90-10. You have to do it behind the scenes. You can't go out to the public and say, here's what we're thinking. We want to go more of an 80-20 because we think that's more fair. What does everyone think? Right. That's going to get shot down in the same way that if they just take all the videos down.
Yep.
Right.
Then it's obvious.
But they can do things behind the scenes.
Mm-hmm. Yep. I think weren't they messing with the likes for a while too? Like what's getting ratioed?
We
Doesn't it
had,
stuff like that?
yeah. So, I mean, with the like, there was one point, how many likes did we lose? We lost like 30 views, and they go through every once in a while. So we can watch that. Yeah. We can go through and they'll, you might lose a subscriber, you know, and they'll go through and they'll filter and they'll figure out, sometimes there's kind of fake likes, bot views.
Oh yeah.
Right. So you might go through and you might have, 214 and all of a sudden it drops down to like 208. You'll watch those.
Right.
Well, we had in one day we've never lost a subscriber. I've never watched the number go down since we've lost a couple times. I've watched it go down one. We lost what, 11 between the hours of 5 and 7 a.m. So I went into the gym at 5 and I came out at 7 and we lost 11 subscribers and we had lost like 40 views. It was like I've never seen that before.
Yeah,
That's
right.
weird. Like apparently everyone woke up early on a Tuesday morning and said, done with this.
And unwatched it somehow. Yeah. I
Yeah.
don't know how you do that, but yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right. So anyway, I don't have to tell you about censorship. That's happening all over the place, but I did want to just briefly talk about Dobbs just so people understand what that was, because you heard for a while, and it's been a couple of years now, but you heard a lot about Roe v. Wade being overturned. Okay. And now a woman's right is taken away and, whatever else. And really, I mean, we talked about this before, but it was probably it was probably the most constitutional way to handle the issue. Okay. Which is to say, as Christians, we believe life begins at conception. And that's what I'll always argue. Okay. But I also accept that there are other perspectives and other faiths that don't see things the same way. Okay. So because of the free exercise clause, okay, leave it to the states. I mean, federalism is there for a reason, and the states are laboratories of democracy. So what Dobbs said was, hey, this is one of those things that isn't best from the top down. Because the federal government, believe it or not, doesn't always know what's best for everybody. So let the states decide. Let the states make up their own mind, and then you can see how things play out state by state. And it just makes sense. Everything about it makes sense. So, anybody who tells you that Dobbs and the conservative, Supreme Court destroyed a woman's right to do X, Y, Z, to choose, or whatever you want to call it, is wrong.
Yeah.
Okay. It's just leaving it to the states and not creating a top-down decision. It makes sense.
What I think is fascinating with that and both the Texas thing is, I mean, you might be able to comment on this historically, Civil War type kind of discussions, right? But we're at a time now where states are starting to look very different, right? I mean, you could be in Indiana, and if you're in Indiana, you can go to a private school and you can have your tax money go to that private school. So you can go to a private Christian high school that might cost $14,000 and you might pay like $3,000 a year, right? So you can do that there. You can't have an abortion in Indiana.
Okay.
Right. Your neighbors are not having abortions. And I'm guessing that they are supporting Texas. I haven't looked at it, but I would assume that Indiana's probably supporting Texas. Then you can come to Minnesota here, and there's absolutely no chance you have no school choice, right? So you've got a bunch of money going to the state, and if you want to do private education, you got to pay for that,
right?
Out of your left pocket,
right?
Abortion, are we up till day of birth?
I don't know the answer to that.
Okay.
I don't know the answer to that.
But I know this last year they've just,
yeah,
all the gloves are off in Minnesota, so that's going to look very different.
Right.
And there's no way that the Minnesota National Guard is being sent down to right. So those are completely different situations, which is interesting. I don't know if you can comment on, is that how it's supposed to be? Are there pros and cons to that?
Yeah, I mean, to a degree, I think it is how it's supposed to be. But as it pertains to sending the National Guard, I mean, let me rephrase. The difference in application of law can vary state by state. And I think that's the way it's supposed to work. I think it's a healthy thing. But I don't think there's ever been a time, at least not since the Civil War, where one state is declaring in favor of a different state adverse to the federal government. I mean, you saw the Missouri versus Biden lawsuit a couple years ago has really turned on a lot of lights. The Attorney General of Missouri and Jeff Landry from Louisiana brought a lawsuit against the Biden administration a couple of years ago. And that was the first time you really started to see states sort of, I mean, that's not to say that states never sued the federal government. Of course they did. Okay. But on this sort of wide scale, aligning with each other adverse to the federal government. And now when you're talking about sending armed troops to support another state, again, outside the purview and semi-adverse to the federal government is unprecedented.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's never happened.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I think it's interesting.
If you had to say, let's just go 3.
Mm-hmm.
What are 3 things that people listening should be worried about when it comes to government type overreach, right? Just 3 big things. This is, certainly one, but I know we've talked about other ones where that's very dangerous. And
Sure.
then I think that kind of leads into that optimism that you talked about, right?
Mhm.
Like if those victories can be won, here's a road forward where this isn't doomsday.
Right. So let me start at the beginning,
Mhm.
or start at the end and then work my way back to the questions.
Yeah.
Okay. So I think we have to think about it in a different way. The reason I'm optimistic, okay, is because you flip it around. So there's always a bell curve, right?
Mhm.
And so on the one end of the bell curve, you have, people are obedient to every regulation that comes down. If you're told to do something by the government, you do it.
Mhm.
Okay. And on the other end, you have chaos and anarchy. Okay. There's nothing at all going on.
Mhm.
Okay. Nobody's listening to anything and you have no governance at all in society. And in the middle, there's the sweet spot where government issues edicts and regulations and the legislature creates laws to govern certain situations and everybody obeys, or at least to the maximum degree possible.
Mhm.
Okay? You have an obedient populace. And that's in the middle, all right, somewhere. And maybe it's one way depending on, the times, okay, the flavor of the day or whatever, it might vary slightly. But the point is, once you get too far one way or the other on that bell curve, people just aren't going to listen to you anymore.
Mhm.
Because they begin to understand like this is just too onerous.
Mhm.
Okay. It's like if you've heard of the Laffer curve, okay, Art Laffer, he was an economist, okay, and he was a Reagan era economist.
Mhm.
Okay. His point was always you have a bell curve, and on one end of the bell curve, okay, you have 0% taxation,
Mhm.
and then the government doesn't collect any taxes. On the other end of the curve, you have 100% taxation. And the government collects 0 taxes
Mhm.
because people don't work.
Yeah.
If you know that all your labor is going to be taken by the government, then you don't give them any labor.
Mhm.
Okay. And so the sweet spot, that is what's the maximum degree that the government can raise your taxes and still collect, is someplace in the middle.
Mhm.
Okay. But too many people don't understand. They think if you raise taxes to 100%, you're going to collect 100% of taxes. If you create regulations and laws that are 100% onerous, everyone's just going to listen and do as they're told,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
But it doesn't work that way, and it never has.
Hmm.
So right now, in terms of balance, okay, we're creeping too far over to the onerous, do as you're told, okay,
Mhm.
the other end, the 100% taxation end.
Yeah.
Okay. So what you're seeing already is people who simply don't listen anymore.
Yeah.
They're not listening because they understand there's this innate sense that that's not a reasonable law. I'm not going to listen to it. I'm going to do what I think is right. And so I'm optimistic because it isn't always the case that when you push harder, you get the result that you want. Because at some degree, you just can't push anymore because people won't listen to you.
Mhm.
And I think the American population in particular is awesome when it comes to that. We
Mhm.
just get it.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, we have a Second Amendment. And I know that you want to take my guns away from me, but you're not going to,
Mhm.
because I'm just not going to listen to you.
Yeah.
And so the lights are coming on for people now. And I think it's going to continue happening that way.
Mhm.
What do I think people should be particularly concerned about and paying attention to? the censorship issue we've been talking about is huge.
Mhm.
It's really big. But again, there's cause for optimism there because you're seeing legacy media die, but
Mhm.
you're seeing podcasts. You're seeing, I mean, Joe Rogan's the most popular guy in like, I mean, his numbers are huge.
It's like 20 times if I'm remembering correctly, it's like 20 times the whole CNN evening lineup.
Right. Exactly.
Right.
It's incredible.
I mean, rest in peace. Like that's dead.
Right.
Legacy media is gone.
100%.
Mhm.
In newspapers, you've watched the Star Tribune, okay, and the New York Times and Wall Street Journal go from this to this to this to this, and I mean, it's happening all over the place.
Mhm.
So that part's great, okay, but the censorship is definitely something to be concerned about
Mhm.
because that's a First Amendment problem, and hand in hand, if the more the First Amendment gets eroded, there's that little clause about laws respecting the establishment of religion too.
Mhm.
Okay, that's right there. And once you get preferred religion, just the way you have preferred speech,
Mhm.
okay, you got problems.
Yeah.
So, otherwise, look, vote, show up and vote.
Mhm.
It matters.
Mhm.
It helps because unfortunately, a lot of these solutions are going to be legislative solutions.
Mhm.
These are just going to have to be things that Congress fixes because we can't.
Mhm.
We can argue about what a law means in a couple different ways. That's what I do.
Mhm.
But ultimately, progress has to be made at the legislature, and we got to get good people in there.
Mhm.
And it's become, the stigma around being a congressman. I mean, what's their approval rating now?
Right.
10%, 12%. Nobody wants to do it. I don't blame them.
Mhm.
There's a lot of corruption, but good people need to stand up
Mhm.
and not be afraid because there's nothing. It seems scary. It seems intimidating, but it's not.
Mhm.
If you push through it, there's nothing on the other side
Mhm.
because it's just bankrupt.
Yeah.
So, I mean, God's on our side, right?
Yeah.
I wasn't saying me, but I mean, God is on our side.
Yeah.
So live your best life,
Mhm.
tell the truth and do it.
Yeah.
And we're going to win.
Yeah.
We're going to win.
Yeah. Well, there's something beautiful about knowing that you are fighting for what is good and what is true and what is beautiful. And
so are you, by the way. Yeah.
yeah, I mean, together it's like this. Yeah.
Podcast.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But and to the question earlier, like, are you calling your buddies up and like trying to navigate around the legal system and like, try to you're not doing that, right? Like the other side is doing that and it's ridiculous.
It is
and it's
ridiculous.
asinine.
Yeah.
And it's nice to be on the side where you say, yeah, you guys have hoodwinked for a while and you've got some
Right.
little minor victories, but that doesn't last long.
Right.
Like that always, at least it destroys itself.
Mm-hmm.
Right. It might destroy some of us with it,
Right.
as you burn things down, but it's
Right.
much better to try to build things up and to fight for things that are worth fighting for.
Absolutely. And reasonable minds can disagree. Again, reasonable minds can disagree about the meaning of something. I got it.
Mhm.
Reasonable minds can disagree about the means to achieve a given end. But the crisis we're looking at right now is that we don't have the same ends.
Yep.
And it hasn't happened in a long time. I mean, look at, Minnesota versus the Dakotas. They're two different countries.
Mm-hmm.
You go west of here and it's like living in a different world.
Yeah.
Especially during the COVID madness and all the rest of that stuff. I mean,
Do you think that'll ever come back?
no.
Yeah.
I don't. I think that's a good example of people standing up and saying no. I mean, is there any doubt in your mind that if people hadn't done that we would have a totally different world? You'd have to get permission to travel.
Mm-hmm.
You'd have to make sure you had a passport, for your, inoculations.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if that's going to slip past the censors or not.
We'll find out.
We'll find out.
We'll get a little disclaimer.
Right.
Inoculations.
Exactly. Fact check. But yeah, if people hadn't stood up and said no,
Mm-hmm.
we wouldn't be in the situation we're in now.
Yeah.
But that's an example of just pushing too far.
Mm-hmm.
And people said, you're just not going to get away with it
Mhm.
because life's too short. I'm not going to sit in my house and be scared all day.
Yeah.
So once that fear goes away, bad guys are in trouble.
Yeah.
So
Because then on the church side, I mean, most pastors I know, everyone feels bad because we didn't do it right. If I could go do it again, I mean, if I knew what I do now, I would have never closed a church. You know, I can understand the first week. The first week was chaos. Maybe the second week. After that, we should have just been done with all of it. You know, and we didn't operate correctly. There's no chance someone's going to come in and say, "All right, Trinity, like it's time for you to do online worship." Like baloney. Go pound sand.
Pass.
Yeah,
absolutely, absolutely. So it's funny. It just made me think of this. You know, you hear so much. You know, you hear people say, "Oh yeah, I'm sure there's some big conspiracy." You know, "Oh yeah, they sit in a dark room and sharpen their knives and whatever." You know, and they're all conspiring together. But the thing is, you know, people forget that you really don't have to have a grand conspiracy. All you have to do is, you know, do what your boss tells you to do. And look, I mean, what's safer? You know, not locking down. Okay, not requiring masks, and then everyone gets sick, and then you're the bad guy because you didn't listen to what you were told. You're also probably going to lose your job.
Yeah.
Okay. Or just getting in line and saying, yeah, if you come into my door, you got to put a mask on. Yeah, you watch the cellophane in aisle 2. You can go to aisle 1 or 3, but not aisle 2. And there are stickers on the floor, and I'm going to call the cops if you don't stand on the stickers. Whatever. Okay. All people have to do is get in line. That's what happened. We saw that. I mean, local officials weren't conspiring in some dark, smoky room, you know, with the governor. But the orders came down from the top, and people had the choice. If I'm wrong and people die, I'm going to get blamed. I'm going to lose my job. But if I get in line and do what I'm told, I'll keep my job.
It plays on fear, which is, as we found out, it's a strong emotion.
Absolutely.
And yeah, it's good to root. One thing that that was very telling was one of the jobs of the Christian faith and of the church and of pastors is to prepare people to die.
Right.
That's why I love Ash Wednesday. You know, remember, oh man, thou art dust, and to dust thou shalt return. Duncan and I joke about, we should just say, instead of that, we should just say, go and die with honor.
right.
Yeah. But I mean, there is that sense of, you know, part of the Christian faith is your goal as a Christian is not longevity of life. Your goal of Christian is to be a Christian.
Right.
You know, and that's your goal.
Right.
Right. And when COVID came, we realized we as the church had done a terrible job of that, because it was common sense for everybody to say, there's a chance I might get sick. So I don't need the Lord's Supper for 4 or 5 months.
Right.
I don't need to go to church. I'll just watch some, you know, spiritual entertainment online, because what if I got sick? God wouldn't want me to get sick.
Right.
And the Christian answer that we had to wrestle with, and we missed preparation for 2020, and I hope we never miss it again, is no, you know, it's okay to stay home when you're sick. Like you know, there are situations where that's something, but no, the goal of your life is not that you live as long as humanly possible.
Right.
And if that means 6 months without the sacrament, you should really rethink that.
Right.
If it means 2 weeks at home because you're sick, or, you know, you're a shut-in because you are struggling with cancer and you need a pastor to come visit you, those are different situations. That's fine.
Right.
But saying we all need to agree that we should not go to church for as long as, until the governor tells us it's safe.
Yeah.
That's baloney.
Right.
You know?
Right. It's not.
And people aren't going to fall for that again, I don't think.
I totally agree with you. I totally agree. My mom's church in north of Colorado Springs handed out little, they did communion like to go. So they have little like bags with like a little wafer. And
Lord have mercy.
Like a little wine thing with the little cup on it or whatever.
Yeah.
Put it like, I think it was on a table outside the door, and you could come and pick it up.
Oh my goodness.
As long as you, silly.
Yeah. You've got, I always love that you've got this. So you've got that picture going on, and then you've got, let's go to like the 3rd century or 2nd century, you know, when Christians are being martyred and persecuted, right? And they'll sneak in the cover of night to go have the sacrament in the church together. Like,
right.
There's that picture. Like people, like they might get snagged on the way and they might get thrown to the lions.
Right.
But we got to get to the sacrament, you know, because that's important. And then you got today where, you know, we're in a bubble suit and I'm in a car down the street because what if, you know?
It's so amazing. Like to think about the idea of a lockdown. I mean, read the Bill of Rights and read the Constitution and then lockdown. Like, wait, what? They do that in prison. Like a whole country. It's like, it's completely incompatible with the Constitution. It's like, we lived through these years and like, we're not supposed to talk about it.
Yeah.
We're just supposed to pretend that it just is gone now. It's not coming back. It's it's amazing. It's breathtaking.
Yeah.
What they got away with, or what was done in the name of safety and health
Mhm.
or whatever. And yeah, I mean, like you said, though, I don't see it coming back anytime soon.
Mhm.
It's just, I think the message was sent loud and clear.
Mhm.
You push to a certain point and then it doesn't work anymore.
Yeah, I like that illustration of that. And I mean, you probably would not have. I don't think you'd have Texas doing what they're doing back in 2019, right? So in other words, I think the mentality has changed to the degree where Texas can do what they're doing and everyone gets it.
Right.
To whereas in 2019 they would be like, "What's going on here?"
Right.
That seems, it's a little over the top, Texas.
Right.
But now everyone's like, "Yep, like we get it because there's insanity and we lived through insanity and we saw that."
Right.
And
I don't think it's any accident. Like you said, one of the roles of one of your jobs is to prepare people to die.
Mm-hmm.
And look, if that fear is gone, if that fear of death is gone, well, what power does COVID have over you? What power does a COVID regulation have over? Sorry, I'm just not scared. I mean, I'm not in charge. God's in charge, so
yeah,
I'm gonna live my life.
That's the free life.
Right.
I love one of the quotes. I don't know, Peter Kreeft or someone says it, but he says, if you fear God, you will fear nothing else. If you don't fear God, you'll find you fear everything else. Because if you fear God properly, you realize that's the important thing.
Right.
And I'm not going to acquiesce on something God asked me to do because there's some other force pressing in on me.
Right.
So that makes life really simple.
Yeah.
That
makes a lot of
you
sense.
said that? Okay. Well, I'm not going to listen to it, but thanks for saying it.
Yeah.
I don't know what you're going to do, but I know what I'm going to do. It's pretty simple. I'm going to follow God.
Right. I'm supposed to be scared of what again?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Got it. Sure.
Thanks.
Will do. Yeah. Thank you.
See you later.
But yeah. Good luck.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Anyway. Yeah. So there we go.
Anything else we should know? It's really important before we close up and go get some food because we've been fasting some today.
Yeah.
We're doing Exodus 90 here, so we do need to go get some fish.
Yes, we do.
Yeah.
Here's the last thing I'll say. Okay. And it sort of ties in. People should get involved. I mean, even though they don't think it matters, and even though, people think city councils is a waste of time and being a mayor is a waste of time, getting involved in your community is a waste of time. It's not. It's not, because everybody kind of knows the villains and the heroes in Washington, D.C. They can name all of those guys, but they don't have that big of an impact on my day-to-day life. The people who do are over there in City Hall. And we need good people at the local level. Do it. Go run for office. Go start a petition. If you live in a charter city in Minnesota, go collect some signatures. Do something. Change the law. Whatever you think it is, whatever you think would make your city better, just go do it. Get involved. Because by doing that, you're challenging the power structures that are in place. And you're telling people, hey, I'm paying attention. We don't want this, and we're not going to tolerate it. So I think direct democracy is a great thing. Anyway, bottom line, go get involved in your church, go get involved in your local government, in your community, and make a difference, because it does. It does make a difference, because that filters upwards. And the more people do that, the more we're going to make a difference here and in this country. I
think that's beautiful. I can even do one more plug there. Right along with that, piggybacking off of that. You mentioned church, and there's other areas too, but I mean, church was also the meeting place. That's where people got together and they said, what's going on in the polis, right? The polis, that's just the city around us. And that's where they would go, and they would hash out these issues and then go and do things, right? Mobilize. And that is part of the church, I mean, when the world's burning around us, it's not our job just to show up at church and then kind of do the Minnesota thing where it's like, well, the Lions lost. That's a bummer. And that's as far as we're going to talk.
Right.
City Hall's burning over there, but we're not going to talk about that.
Right.
You should talk about it. You should talk about it at church, not in the sermon. The sermon's meant for something else, but afterwards, Christian men and Christian women, especially Christian men, need to gather together and say, hey, the city's burning us. We're the ones who are supposed to do something about it. Yep. One lantern if by land and two if by sea, right? Paul Revere hung them where? Church belfry. Yeah. Yeah. There you go. Amen. Yes. Amen. Good. All right. Greg Joseph. Thanks, Brian. Yeah. Cheers.